Hey guys, Spence here. You know this guy named Trip Hawkins? If you do, chances are you know he founded a little company called, what was it? Ah yes, Electronic Arts, yes, also known as EA. But the thing is, he founded another company back in 1991, called 3DO, or the 3DO Company. Anyway, along with trying to be a console manufacturer for some reason back then, they also made a series of games called BattleTanx. It only really got two main games of the series, BattleTanx 1 that came out on the Nintendo 64 and the Game Boy Color, and BattleTanx 2 Global Assault which came out on the Nintendo 64 again and the PlayStation. Yeah, the company went bankrupt in 2003, so that's why you haven't heard of BattleTanx recently. Alright, now light history lesson aside, the game we're actually going to be talking about, BattleTanx for the Game Boy Color, actually wasn't developed by 3DO Company. They published it, but I guess they felt that developing for a handheld was too small scale and a waste of their time or something. So instead, another company ended up doing it, Lucky Chicken Games, which the most notable title after looking through the library was Aquaman Battle of Atlantis for the GameCube, which for those who don't know is the GameCube equivalent of Superman 64. Yeah, I'm kinda glad I started playing this game again before researching. The lore of BattleTanx goes like this. Apparently back in 2001, a virus went and killed 99.9% of the female population. Because of this, countries began fighting over quarantine zones, and apparently this led to nuclear war because smart people and smart decisions. Now most areas of civilization are controlled by gangs, who of course have tanks for some reason. Enter Mario Griffin and Peach Madison. I mean Griffin Spade and Madison. Really, guys? Anyway, she gets kidnapped and Griffin has to go save her, and that is the gist of the game. And I'd like to remind you, the Game Boy version only talks about half of that, namely the Griffin and Madison part. Now, Lucky Chicken's interpretation of BattleTanx seemed a little off, namely because for a world that was supposed to have suffered a nuclear war at some point, it seems suspiciously non-nuked. Cities look perfectly normal as if people would be walking up and down them normally like yesterday or day before and the day after you go rolling in through. I mean, only buildings you can even take down are blue ones, and that itself is weird. But my favorite nitpicky disconnect is how they show you a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge and how it's destroyed, and then your mission is to literally cross the bridge and you just cross the bridge as if it's not destroyed. They really didn't take advantage of the theme here, it just comes off as urban warfare. There are two main modes, story mode and battle mode. Battle mode is basically a stage select for the stages in story mode, allowing you to pick whatever tank you want. Meanwhile, story mode will take you through the story in sequential order, using whatever tanks the game decides to give you for that mission. Speaking of, when you start a mission, you'll be in one of three tanks. The small tank, which is fast, but has less firepower, the medium tank, which is well-rounded, and then the large tank, which is slow, but supposedly has more firepower. To be frank, I can't tell the difference between them that much, outside the big tank being super slow and making it a detriment when there's more than one enemy on the screen, and the small tank can really not take punishment. Those are the two things I really notice. Now your tank pretty much controls like a race car if you know that you hold the B button down to accelerate and the A button to fire your weapon, with the control pad really being for steering. I didn't know that, so for a good while I had jerky hands at the steering wheel, making aiming a complete pain. Though even after figuring out my error, a lot of my arguments still stand. Now like its console counterpart, you can pick up items on the ground. First there are the missiles with a homing property, and can also go over walls, making them useful in that scenario, but not much else. Then there are the bouncy shells, which to take advantage of their special qualities will require more effort than just to kill an enemy without them. Then there's the nuclear item, which quite frankly is overkill unless the enemy is over a wall again, or there's more than one enemy on screen, which usually isn't the case. And then there's the rarest item, invisibility, which while it works against enemies very well, it also works against you too. Very quickly after you pick this up, you'll be running into walls and will need to reorient yourself, which is impossible while you're invisible. Conveniently, if you fire, you will then be visible for a brief moment at a time. So yes, to effectively get around while invisible, you have to do the least stealthy thing you could possibly do. Is there echo in this room? Now there's something I should mention about the pickups, and it's really that they really stink. All of the power-ups outside of the nuclear item hurt less than your standard weapon. And since the most effective way of dealing with enemies is driving towards them while firing and trying to kill them before they get a lock on you and start hitting you with their pinpoint accuracy, you want to stick with your main weapon most of the time unless there's an enemy over a wall and then there's convenient missiles placed somewhere. But if that's not the case, chances are you'll just ignore them. Then there are 1-ups, which do the obvious thing of letting you continue the game after you die, and then there are health pickups that come in two varieties. First, the big med packs that you find on the ground, crosses, or the ones that enemies drop for some reason. And when I say enemies, I mean all of them. All of them. As if the game expects you to do terrible in it. Which makes sense to one degree, since levels are typically gauntlets of enemies. Though something about that seems a bit off. It's either because every level is like that, or because it trivializes combat a lot of the time. Who knows? Speaking of enemies, they come in four varieties. Small tank, medium tank, large tank, and turret tank, though you can't pick it, but why would you want to be it? Although all the tanks you run into typically are stationary, so arguably they're all just varying armor levels of the turret tank. And yes, this does trivialize the small tank into cannon fodder. Now onto the missions themselves, which at their most base level are all scavenger hunts. You're either hunting down every single enemy, hunting down collectibles, hunting down the particular location you're supposed to go to, and that's pretty much it. There's only two levels that deviate from this slightly, with one needing you to kill one very particular enemy, and one needing you to collect one thing and then return back to the location that you started from. So basically, every mission is more or less the same. Pretty much making this way and adding the whole scavenger hunt feeling is these level layouts. Now, you're in cities most of the time, but it feels like a maze. Now, I'm not saying it looks like these cities were made by some crazed maniac with a SimCity builder. No, it's not like that. The thing is, there are a bunch of barricades and T-intersections. And when you're following your little arrow guide, which you will most of the time, and I'm glad it's there, but typically after you get your objective where you kill an enemy that's in a corner or find a collectible, they'll then point you to a direction, the next one, which will be behind a wall or something, or really far away behind a wall, and then you'll have to circle back to where you came, looking for a blue building that you missed, or a street you didn't go down. All the while killing any enemy you run across, so basically making any scavenger hunt or getting to a particular location mission the same as, well, exterminate all enemies missions, and also making the game pretty repetitive and very, very samey. But the thing that really gets me are these triangle barriers. I mean, they're clearly only there to extend gameplay time and to halt your progress, but if you're gonna do that, at least make them something else. Use fire, craters, toxic waste. It's supposed to be post-apocalyptic, remember? And that's not even talking about the buildings that apparently can't be taken down by your tank, except for the blue ones that seem to be the only thing affected by the nukes. And then it just completely underplays the fact that you're a tank and it feels more like you're driving with a normal vehicle. Meanwhile, you can actually run over normal cars and trees. Which is nice, but still! I tend to like extermination missions more because of this, because it doesn't involve navigating the level that much. Though let me clarify, me saying I like something more just means I like something more than the current standard, which is pretty low right now. Meanwhile, collectathons and freaking get to the location missions are really unenjoyable, and just come off as tedious, especially to get to certain location missions, where basically there are barricades everywhere and you have to go the very specific route they want you to take. Now, to beat the game, you go through a tour of the post-apocalyptic, non-apocalyptic United States and some of its major cities. San Francisco, New York, DC, Las Vegas, okay. All the while clashing with some of the gangs from the BattleTanx franchise, and ending with you saving no last name Madison. Now, there's no extra adventure or anything, but there is a difficulty setting for the game, though, as far as I can tell, the only difference it seems to do is make the enemies harder to kill, which quite frankly does not make the game more enjoyable, just making the game longer than normal. So would I recommend this game? No! It doesn't feel like I'm piloting a tank through a post-apocalyptic wasteland, mainly because 1, it doesn't look like a post-apocalyptic anything, and 2, because it feels like I'm driving a minivan with the tires shot out. And that's not even talking about how the tanks feel way too similar, how the enemies act way too similar, namely like turrets, how pickups are pretty much worthless, and how levels are basically the same no matter how you slice it. It's one of those games that after the first few levels, everything just breaks down into a boring and tedious experience. Honestly, the only reasons why I see anyone would want to pick up this game is if they want to fill out their library at Lucky Chicken Games or follow some weird paper trail at Trip Hawkins.